20 times. That is how many promises are gathered in this letter. 20 places where God does not merely comfort what you lost, but says He will give it back, not replace it, not help you forget it, restore it. 20 is a small number. You could count it on your fingers twice, and yet somewhere in those 20, there is one that has your name pressed into it. The way a hand presses into wet clay and leaves a shape that stays. You may not know which one yet. That is all right. The letter will find it for you. There is a word that runs underneath all 20 of them, and the word is restore. It is not a soft word. In Scripture, it is a legal word, a farming word, a shepherd's word. It means to give back what was taken. It means to make the count right again. It means the loss is not the last entry in the ledger. You have lost something. That is not a guess. Nobody arrives at this point in a life without setting something down along the road, sometimes willingly, more often not. A husband, a wife, a body that used to do what you asked of it. A house with a particular door. A child who no longer calls. Years that went somewhere you cannot name. Work you were good at. A name people used to say with respect. The version of yourself you assumed you would still be by now. And you have probably made your peace with most of it, in the way people do, not by healing exactly, but by learning where to step, so it does not ache as much. This letter is going to disturb that peace a little, gently, on purpose, because there is a better peace underneath it, and the Father has never once said that what you lost is simply gone. My child, a letter arrived for you. It was written long before you were born, and yet every line carries your name. This is a letter from the Father, and when the Father speaks, every word is Scripture. Let us begin with the loss almost nobody says out loud. Not a person, not a possession. Time, the years, you know the ones. Perhaps it was a stretch of your life that went to an illness, yours or someone else's. And when you came out the other side, a decade had passed, and you could not account for a single ordinary pleasure in it. Perhaps it went to a marriage that was work from the first year to the last. Perhaps it went to a job that used you up and then let you go with a card everyone signed. Perhaps it went to worry, plain, grinding worry, and worry is the most expensive thing a person can spend a year on, because at the end of it you have nothing to show, not even a scar. And here is the particular cruelty of lost years. You cannot point at them. If a man loses a house in a fire, the neighbors bring food. If a woman loses her husband, people know what to say, more or less. But if you lost 11 years to something that had no funeral, there is no casserole for that. There is no card. You simply carry the arithmetic around. I was 39 when this started, and I was 50 when it ended, and I do not know where I went. You have done the arithmetic. Probably more than once, probably in the chair you are sitting in. And the arithmetic always ends the same way, with the quiet verdict that time is the one thing that does not come back. Everything else has a chance. Money can be earned again. Strength can be rebuilt. A little, even a relationship can sometimes be repaired. But the years are gone into a place with no door. That is what everyone knows. That is the settled wisdom of the world, and it is repeated so often and so confidently that it has the sound of a law. It is not a law. It is an assumption, and it is the first assumption this letter is going to take apart. There was a farmer in Judah who watched it happen, he would have been standing at the edge of his own field, the field his father worked, and his father's father, and he would have seen it coming from a long way off, the way you see weather, not a cloud. Clouds move like water. This moved like a shadow that had decided something. The locusts came over the ridge in a body so dense that men said afterward the sun went the color of old brass. The sound arrived before the swarm did, not a buzzing, but a dry, crackling roar, like a fire in a stand of reeds, like a great many small teeth working at once. And then they landed. He watched a season of his life eaten in an afternoon. Not stolen, eaten. There is a difference, and the difference is what broke him. A thief you can chase. A thief leaves tracks, and sometimes a thief can be made to give it back. But the locusts did not take his barley anywhere. They turned it into nothing right in front of him. And then they lifted off the bare stalks and went to eat somebody else's field, and the whole thing took less time than it had taken him to plow one row in the spring. He knelt down in the dirt afterward. The prophet Joel does not tell us that, but the prophet Joel describes what that country looked like when the swarm had passed. And men do not stand up straight in a field like that. The vine dried up, the fig tree languished, the pomegranate, the palm, the apple tree, even all the trees of the field are withered. He would have picked up a stalk, and it would have come apart in his fingers like ash. And then there is the second year. That is the part we skip when we read it quickly. He had to go back out into that field the next spring and plow it again, with the taste of the previous year still in his mouth, not knowing whether the swarm would return. And the year after that. 4 kinds of locust, Joel says: palmer worm, locust, cankerworm, caterpillar, which is his way of saying it was not one bad season. It came in waves. It came back. That is closer to what happened to you, is it not? It was rarely one clean catastrophe. It was a thing that kept coming back and eating another year, and another, until you stopped planting expectations at all. He stood in that field with nothing but arithmetic, so many years, so many gone, and no reason on earth to think the count could ever be corrected. And into a field exactly like that, God spoke a sentence that no farmer had ever heard before. He did not say, "I will comfort you in your loss." He did not say, "Next year will be better." He used the language of a court, the language of a debt being repaid to the last measure. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where he stood, in the middle of your own eaten years, holding a handful of ash, doing the arithmetic. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words: "And I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten, the cankerworm, and the caterpillar, and the palmer worm, my great army which I sent among you, and ye shall eat in plenty, and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, that hath dealt wondrously with you, and my people shall never be ashamed." Joel 2:25-26. "For your shame ye shall have double, and for confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess the double, everlasting joy shall be unto them." Isaiah 61:7. "Thou, which hast showed me great and sore troubles, shalt quicken me again, and shalt bring me up again from the depths of the earth. Thou shalt increase my greatness, and comfort me on every side." Psalm 71:20-21. "And I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph, and I will bring them again to place them, for I have mercy upon them. And they shall be as though I had not cast them off. for I am the Lord their God, and will hear them. Zechariah 10:6. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Read it again, slowly, because the world will tell you it cannot mean what it says. I will restore to you the years, not the harvest, not the crops, the years. God reaches past the barley and puts his hand on the calendar itself. The one thing you were certain was beyond recovery. And he says, that is mine to give back. Now, how? You are sensible. You have lived long enough to distrust a promise that cannot be pictured. He does not hand you back the 11 years so you can live them over. What he does is stranger and, I think, better. He makes the remaining years carry the weight the lost ones were supposed to carry. He compresses into what is left a fullness that no ordinary stretch of time could hold. Ye shall eat in plenty and be satisfied. A restored year is not merely another year. It is a year with the density of many. You have watched this happen without naming it. You have seen a woman who lost her 30s to caring for a dying mother, and then, in her 60s, she becomes the one person in her whole family that everyone brings their grief to, because she learned something in those eaten years that nobody learns in a good decade. The years were not returned to her. They were returned in her. That is not a smaller promise than the one you wanted. It is the larger one. And notice what stands at the end of it. My people shall never be ashamed. Because that is the second wound, is it not? Not just the loss of the time, but the shame of it. The feeling that a stronger person would have salvaged more, that you wasted what you were given. God ends the verse there deliberately. He takes the ledger out of your hands and closes it, and he says the account is not against you. So when you next do the arithmetic, and you will, that is a habit, and habits outlive their reasons, do it all the way to the end this time. So many years, so many gone, and then keep going to the one who says he will bring them again to place them, for I have mercy upon them. The count is not finished. You are still in the sentence. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Before we go on to the second promise, one small thing, and it costs you nothing. If this letter is reaching you where you actually live, would you press the like button? That is all. A simple like places this letter in front of someone else who is sitting in a quiet room doing the same arithmetic you were doing a few minutes ago. You will never meet them. They will never know it was you. But the letter travels by that one small act, and it travels to exactly the sort of person who would never go looking for it. One tap, the thumb, just below this letter, and if you have ever felt unseen by everyone but God, write, "He sees me" below. So the next reader knows they are not alone. Now let us speak about the body, not illness. We will come to that. Something plainer and, in its way, harder to say aloud. The loss of strength. The slow subtraction. There was a day, and you did not know it was the day, when you carried something heavy up a flight of stairs for the last time without thinking about it. You just did it. You set it down at the top, slightly out of breath, and got on with the afternoon. Nobody marks that day. There is no ceremony for it. But somewhere behind you it exists, a small, unnoticed border, and you are on the other side of it now. And it is not only the lifting. It is the hand that will not open the jar. It is the second trip to bring in what used to take one. It is standing up from a low chair and making a sound you did not used to make, and hoping nobody heard it. It is the stairs. It is always, eventually, the stairs. What galls is not the weakness itself. You are a reasonable person. You knew this was in the contract. What galls is the way it makes you a project. People begin to arrive at your door with a particular expression. They take things out of your hands. They say, "Let me," and they mean it kindly, and every single time a small piece of you goes quiet and thinks, "I built things. I carried people. I was the one who came when someone called." And you are still that person. That is the cruel part. The wanting has not diminished at all. Only the machinery has. The self inside is not 60 or 75 or 88. The self inside is whatever age you were when you were most yourself. And it is still in there, entirely intact. Filing daily complaints against a body that will no longer take instruction. So you begin to ration. You choose which errand is worth the fatigue. You decline an invitation not because you do not want to go, but because you have calculated the cost of the walk from the car. Nobody sees the calculation. They only see that you said no, and after enough no's, they stop asking, and the world quietly gets smaller by its own arithmetic. That is the loss in this movement. Not death, not disease. The steady confiscation of your own capacity, one small competence at a time, and the loneliness of being the only one who remembers what you used to be able to do. The prophet is writing to people who had run out, not out of food, out of themselves. They were in Babylon, and they had been there long enough that the young men who had been carried off were not young anymore. Isaiah is writing to a generation that had done the hard arithmetic of exile. We are not going home. Whatever we were is finished. And into that, he says a sentence that must have sounded almost like mockery to a tired man. He giveth power to the faint. But look at what he does next, because it is one of the most carefully built sentences in all of Scripture, and its construction is the whole point. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. He begins with the strongest thing his listeners can picture, not an average man, a young man in his prime, the one who carries the heaviest load at harvest, the one who runs the message 20 miles and arrives still breathing easily. Isaiah takes that man and drops him. Utterly fall. The Hebrew is not delicate about it. It is the word for stumbling and going down in a heap. Now, hold that image, because the next line is doing something a modern reader almost always misses. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. He does not say the strong will stay strong. He says the strong will fall and the waiting will rise. He has inverted the entire order. In Isaiah's sentence, strength is not a property of the body at all. It is a transfer. It comes from somewhere. And the qualification for receiving it is not youth, not health, not capacity. It is waiting, which is, if you think about it, the one thing you have become extraordinarily good at. Then comes the strangest part, and I want you to see it as it is written, rather than as it is usually printed on greeting cards. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. That is backwards. Any writer building to a climax would go walk, then run, then fly. Isaiah goes fly, then run, then walk, from the spectacular down to the ordinary. He descends on purpose, because he is writing to people who will not be flying anywhere. He is writing to people whose great remaining task is to walk, to keep going, on an ordinary road, on an ordinary day, without falling over. And he puts that last, in the position of honor, as the hardest and highest of the three. There was a time when your faith looked like flying. Perhaps you remember it. A season when you felt carried, when prayer was easy and God seemed near enough to touch. Then, for a long stretch, it was running, effortful, but you were covering ground. And now it is walking. Just walking. Getting up, getting through, staying upright, still speaking to Him. Isaiah says that is the summit, not the falling off. The summit. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where those exiles stood, worn past the point where willpower helps, having done your arithmetic, being told by a prophet that the sentence does not end where you assumed. And this is what the Father says to you. In His own words, He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might He increaseth strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. And they shall walk and not faint. Isaiah 40:29-31. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Psalm 23:3. For which cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. 2 Corinthians 4:16. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Isaiah 41:10. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Notice where the renewal is placed. Though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. Paul is not pretending. He grants the perishing. He says it plainly, and he was a man who had been stoned and left for dead, shipwrecked, beaten with rods. He knew exactly what a body costs. He does not argue with the subtraction. He simply says it is happening on the outside, and something else is happening underneath it, on a different schedule, running the opposite direction. Two things are true about you at once. One is being spent. One is being built. And you have been given eyes that can only see the first one, which is why you need a letter to tell you about the second. He restoreth my soul. Not my strength, my soul. And the word David uses is the shepherd's word for a sheep that has gone down and cannot rise. A cast sheep, they call it, rolled onto its back by the weight of its own wool, legs in the air, unable to right itself, and it will die there if nobody comes. The shepherd does not shout at it. He does not reason with it. He kneels down, gets his hands underneath it, and turns it over. Then he holds it upright until the blood comes back into the legs and it can stand on its own. That is the picture behind the phrase you have heard 1,000 times. Not a poetic sentiment. A large, tired animal being physically turned right side up by hands that came looking for it. So here is what to do with the stairs, and the jar, and the second trip. Stop reading them as evidence. That is what they have become. A daily case being assembled against you, and you have been quietly agreeing with the verdict. They are not evidence. They are the outward man perishing, exactly as Paul said it would, right on schedule, in a body that was never the permanent thing. And when someone takes the bag out of your hands and says, "Let me, let them," not because you have given up, because fear thou not. For I am with thee is spoken to a person who needs an arm, and the arm that arrives is very often attached to a neighbor. You are not being diminished. You are being turned over by hands that came looking for you. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. There's a thing that goes missing so gradually that most people never name it. Not happiness. Happiness comes and goes, and always did. Something underneath happiness. The default setting. The hum. There was a version of you that woke up and, without any particular reason, was glad to be awake. Not ecstatic. Just willing. Interested in the day. The kettle going, the light in the window, the small, pleasant business of being a person with things to do. It required no effort. It was simply the ground you stood on, and you cannot say when it stopped. There was no announcement. But somewhere along the way, the ground changed, and now the day is something to be got through rather than entered. You still do everything. You are not idle, and you are not self-pitying. You would be embarrassed to be either. You make the meals, you keep the appointments, you ask after people, and you mean it. But you are doing it from further away. There is a pane of glass between you and your own life, and everything reaches you slightly muffled. The worst of it is at the good moments. That is what nobody warns you about. Grief at a funeral makes sense, but grief at a grandchild's birthday, when the cake is lit and everybody is laughing, and you are standing at the edge of the kitchen feeling absolutely nothing, that frightens you. You think, something in me has broken that does not repair, and you have not told anyone. Of course you have not. How would that conversation go? I have everything I need, and I feel nothing. It sounds like ingratitude. It sounds like a complaint from someone with no right to complain. So you keep it, and you perform the appropriate warmth, and you go home tired from the acting. Here is what I want to say to you about that, and I want to say it before anything else. It is not ingratitude, and it is not a defect of faith. It is a wound. Joy is not a virtue you failed to maintain. Joy is a living thing, and living things can be injured, and something injured yours. And what is injured can be healed. That is a different category entirely from what is lost. The man who wrote the most honest sentence about this had done something unforgivable. David was on the roof. That is where it begins. A king with nothing to do at the hour when kings should have been at war, walking on a flat roof above a city gone quiet, and seeing a woman who was not his. What followed was not a moment of weakness. It was a campaign. He sent for her. He took her, and when the pregnancy came, he did not repent. He engineered. He recalled her husband from the front and tried to send him home to his own bed so the child could be passed off as Uriah's. And Uriah would not go. That is the detail that turns the story from squalid to unbearable. The soldier slept at the palace gate with the servants, and when David asked him why, Uriah said, "The ark and Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go into mine house to eat and to drink?" The man's integrity was the obstacle. His decency was the thing standing in the way. So David wrote a letter. He wrote it in his own hand, and he sent it to the front, and he sent it by Uriah. The man carried his own death warrant 20 miles and never opened it. Set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And then a year passed. That is the part we hurry past. A whole year. He married her. The child was born. life resumed, the court functioned, the Psalms presumably still got written, and every single day of that year, David woke up with it. Nathan had not come yet. Nobody knew. He had got away with it entirely, which meant there was nothing to do with it, nowhere to put it, no punishment to accept and be done with. Just the daily weight of being a man who had done that, and having to be king anyway. Whatever was left of his gladness died somewhere in that year. When Nathan finally came and told him about a rich man who took a poor man's only lamb, and David's anger flared up hot. The man that hath done this thing shall surely die. And Nathan said, Thou art the man. What broke in David was not surprise. It was relief. Somebody had finally said it. And out of that came the 51st Psalm. Not restore unto me my innocence. That was gone, and he knew it. Not restore unto me my reputation. He asks for the one thing he cannot manufacture and cannot deserve. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where he stood, not with his sin, but with his silence, having carried something a long way with nowhere to set it down. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit. Psalm 51-12. Thou hast turned for me my mourning into dancing. Thou hast put off my sackcloth, and girded me with gladness. Psalm 30:11. Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return, and come with singing unto Zion. And everlasting joy shall be upon their head. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and mourning shall flee away. Isaiah 51:11. And ye now therefore have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart shall rejoice, and your joy no man taketh from you. John 16:22. Did you hear it? Those were not my words, they never were. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation. Look at what he does not ask for. He does not ask for the joy of a clean record. That ship had sailed and taken the crew with it. He asks for the joy of thy salvation, the gladness that belongs to being rescued, which is a joy only available to people who needed rescuing. It is not the joy of the innocent. It is a joy the innocent cannot have. That is important for you, because part of what has muffled your gladness is a sense that you are no longer entitled to it. Too much has happened. Too many people are gone. It feels almost indecent to be glad, as though gladness were a betrayal of the ones you have buried. David's request cuts underneath that. The joy he asks for is not built on circumstances being good, and it is not built on his own record being clean. It is built entirely on the character of the one doing the saving, which means it cannot be disqualified by what you have lost or what you have done. Thou hast turned for me my mourning into dancing. Turned, not replaced, not erased. Turned, the way you turn soil, the way you turn a garment inside out and find it lined with something you did not know was there. The mourning is the material. It is not thrown away and swapped for something cheerful. It is the very thing that gets turned. And notice, the promise in Isaiah does not say the sorrow leaves. It says sorrow and mourning shall flee away. They flee. They are put to flight, which is the language of a routed army leaving a field it had occupied. Occupying armies do not leave because you asked nicely. They leave because something stronger arrived. So do not manufacture the feeling. That is the mistake. Trying to work up gladness at the birthday party, performing the warmth, going home exhausted from the acting. You cannot generate this. David could not either, and he was the best songwriter in the ancient world. He could produce every feeling except the one he needed, which is why the psalm is a request and not a resolution. Ask for it. In those words, if you like, they are already scripture, and he has heard them before from a man in far worse condition than you. And then, let it come the way it comes, not as a flood, usually, but as a small, unreasonable gladness at something ordinary. Steam off a cup, a bird working at the grass outside the window, the particular quiet of a room you know well. Your joy no man taketh from you, not the years, not the losses, not the ones who left, not the thing you did that you have never said aloud. No man. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say. To you, there is a loss that has no object at all. Nothing was taken from your hands. What went missing was how your name sounded in other people's mouths. You had a place once. People knew what you were for. Perhaps you were the one they called at the office when the thing went wrong at 4 p.m, and somebody had to fix it. Perhaps you ran a department, or a ward, or a classroom, or a farm, and when you walked in, the room adjusted slightly. Perhaps you were simply the mother of that family, the one whose kitchen everybody ended up in, whose opinion settled arguments, whose approval mattered. And now you are the person in the chair by the window. It happens fastest at retirement, but it does not only happen there. It happens when the children become the ones who make the decisions. It happens when your husband dies and you discover that half your standing in the world was his, borrowed, and it left with him. It happens the first time a young person explains to you, slowly and kindly, something you have known for 40 years. The word for it is diminishment, and the sting is not vanity. You were never vain. The sting is that competence was how you loved people. Being useful was the shape your care took, and when the usefulness is taken away, you are left with all the same love and no way to spend it. So you find yourself in conversations, offering the thing you know, and watching it land as a pleasant anecdote rather than as counsel. You watch them wait politely for you to finish. And you learn, quite quickly, to say less. That is the part nobody sees. Not the loss of the title, the self-editing that follows it. The way a person with 50 years of hard-won judgment starts pre-deciding that nobody wants it and shrinks their own contribution before anyone else has the chance to. You are not being ungrateful. You are grieving a name, the one you built with your own hands over half a century, the one that meant something when it was spoken in a certain room. She had a name once, too, and she lost it in the ordinary way. She could not have children. We do not know how many years Hannah carried that, long enough for it to have become her identity in the village, long enough that Peninnah, the other wife, had built an entire cruelty around it, provoking her sore, the text says, to make her fret, year after year at the feast, in front of everybody. Consider the geometry of that household. Elkanah loved Hannah. The text is clear. He gave her a worthy portion. He said to her, "Am not I better to thee than 10 sons?" And that kindness, well meant, missed her entirely, because she was not grieving a shortage of affection. She was grieving a place in the world. In that culture, a woman without children had no standing, no security, no voice in the community, and no protection when her husband died. Peninnah had sons. Peninnah had a future. Hannah had a husband who loved her, and a name that meant nothing when it was spoken. So she went up to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and she did something that had no precedent for a woman in her position. She went alone, and she prayed for herself. And she prayed so hard that her lips moved without sound. Eli the priest was sitting by a post of the temple, and he watched her, and he concluded she was drunk. Read that again, because it is the whole movement in one detail. The one professional religious man in the building looked at the most sincere prayer offered in Israel that year, and diagnosed a woman who had had too much wine. How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. There is no lower place in the story than that. She has no children, no standing, a rival who torments her at the annual feast, a kind husband who does not understand. And now the priest of God has looked directly at her grief and misread it as disgrace. And Hannah does not weep and leave. She answers him, "No, my lord. I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have poured out my soul before the Lord," and something in the steadiness of it turns the old man completely around. He blesses her, and she goes away, and the text says her countenance was no more sad. Before anything had changed, before there was any child, before there was any evidence at all. And when the son came, and she brought him back to that same temple, and handed him to that same priest, she stood up and sang. The song she sang is the one Mary would echo 1,000 years later in a different village, and it is not a lullaby. It is a song about the whole order of the world being turned upside down. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where she stood, misread by the very people who should have known, with a name that no longer opens any door. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "And the Gentiles shall see thy righteousness, and all kings thy glory, and thou shalt be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall name. Thou shalt also be a crown of glory in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of thy God. Thou shalt no more be termed forsaken, neither shall thy land any more be termed desolate, but thou shalt be called Hephzibah, and thy land Beulah. For the Lord delighteth in thee, and thy land shall be married." Isaiah 62:2-4. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princes, and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he hath set the world upon them. 1 Samuel 2:8. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth the needy out of the dunghill, that he may set him with princes, even with the princes of his people. Psalm 113:7-8. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth saving he that receiveth it. Revelation 2:17. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill to set them among princes. Hannah's own words. The woman who had no standing sang the song about standing, and she sang it in the building where she had been called a drunk. But look at what the Father says through Isaiah, because it is more personal than a change of fortune. Thou shalt be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall name. Not a new position, a new name. And note who does the naming. Not the village, not the family, not the young colleague explaining your own trade to you. The mouth of the Lord shall name it. Your old name was given to you by rooms. It was made of what you could do, and it lasted exactly as long as you could do it, which is why losing it felt like losing yourself. Anything a room gives you, a room can take back. Thou shalt no more be termed forsaken. That word, termed, called. It is a word about what people say. God is not only addressing your circumstance, He is addressing your reputation, the thing that gets said about you when you are not in the room, and He is overruling it. And then the last one, which He whispers rather than announces, I will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth saving he that receiveth it. Consider what that means. A name that nobody else knows. Not a title to be displayed, not a standing to be recognized by others, a name known only between the two of you, which means it cannot be diminished by any room, because no room ever had it. It cannot be forgotten when you stop being useful. Nobody can hand it to a younger person. So here is the practical thing, and it is smaller than you expect. Say the thing anyway. The next time you are in the conversation and you have the judgment that 50 years bought, and you feel the old preemptive editing start, the calculation that they do not want it, say it anyway. Briefly, without insisting. You are not performing usefulness. You are simply refusing to disappear on schedule. Some of them will wait politely for you to finish. And one of them, one day, 5 years from now, standing in their own difficulty, will hear your voice saying it. That is how it always travels. You will almost never see it land. The stone is already engraved. The name on it is already yours. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now we come to the empty chair, not the one left by death. That is another movement, and we will get there. The one left by a person who is still alive. There is a particular silence that a living absence makes, and anyone who has one recognizes it immediately. It is different from grief. Grief settles. Grief has a shape, and, eventually, a place to sit. This does not settle, because every day contains the possibility that today is the day, and every evening contains the fact that it was not. Perhaps it is a son who stopped calling. Perhaps a daughter who is polite at Christmas and gone by the 27th. Perhaps there was a falling out with words in it that cannot be unsaid. Or perhaps, and this is more common and much stranger, there was no falling out at all, just a slow drift, and now too much time has passed for either of you to know how to begin. You have gone over it. Of course you have. You have conducted the inquiry 1,000 times in the chair by the window. What did I do? What did I miss? Was it the thing I said in the hospital corridor? Was it the way I was in 1987, when I was working too much and short-tempered and did not notice? You have prosecuted yourself thoroughly. You have also, in fairer moments, prosecuted them. Neither verdict brings anyone home. And you keep the phone close. You will not admit this to anybody, but you do. You check it more than you need to. When it rings, you feel your chest go tight before you look at the screen, and then you arrange your face before you answer, in case. The particular cruelty is the not knowing. If they were gone, you could mourn them. If they were coming, you could wait. Instead, you have this: a person who is out there right now, this minute, living a day you know nothing about, in a house you may never have seen, and the distance between you is not measured in miles at all. and you have started to be careful about how you speak of them, because you have noticed people's faces when you say their name. So you have learned to say they're doing well, keeping busy, and change the subject. Another thing carried in silence. The father in the story does something no man of his position and age would have done, and everyone hearing Jesus tell it would have gasped at the wrong part. Start earlier than we usually do. The younger son asks for his inheritance while his father is alive. That request has a plain meaning in that culture, and it is not financial. It is, "I wish you were dead." In a village like that, the expected response was a beating and disinheritance, and the neighbors would have considered it just. Instead, the father divided unto them his living. He liquidated, which means selling land that had been in the family for generations, land the neighbors farmed alongside. And every single person in that village would have known exactly what had happened and why. The father absorbed that humiliation in public and let the boy go. Then the years. The text gives them to us in one line, not many days after. But the son's journey through a far country and a famine, and the pigs is not a weekend. It is long enough to burn through a fortune and reach the point where a Jewish boy is standing in a Gentile pig field, and no man gave unto him. And here is what I want you to see. The father did not know any of that. Not the famine, not the pigs, not the hunger. He had no letters. There was no word. He simply had an empty chair and a village that knew, and a silence with no information in it whatsoever, for years. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him at a distance, which tells you, without telling you, what that man had been doing every day for years. You do not spot a figure at the far end of a road, unless you are looking at the road. He had a working farm, and an older son, and responsibilities, and some part of every day he spent with his eyes on the horizon, watching a road that had produced nothing but disappointment for a very long time. And then he ran. You have heard that 100 times, and I want to slow it down. Men of his age and standing in that culture did not run. Running required lifting the hem of the robe and exposing the legs, and it was considered a deep indignity, a thing done by servants and children. He was the head of a household, an elder, a man of property, and there was a whole village between the road and his gate. He ran through them. He ran through the same neighbors who had watched him sell the land, who knew precisely what the boy had done, who would have been entitled by custom to meet that returning son with contempt. And he got there first. He put his own body between his son and the village. Whatever they were going to say, they would now have to say it about a man with his arms around the boy's neck. The son had a speech prepared. He had rehearsed it in the pig field, and it was a good speech, and it ended with, "Make me as one of thy hired servants." He gets about halfway through. The father is not listening. The father is already shouting at the servants about a robe and a ring and shoes, the ring especially, because a ring meant authority. It meant, "This is my son, and he signs for me." And the boy's careful speech about becoming a servant dies in his mouth, unfinished, unnecessary. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where that father stood, at the window, watching a road, with no information and no reason and no plan for what you would say. And this is what the father says to you, in his own words. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat, and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Luke 15:20-24. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Malachi 4:6. For the promise is unto you, and to your children, and to all that are afar off, even as many as the Lord our God shall call. Acts 2:39. But thus saith the Lord, Even the captives of the mighty shall be taken away, and the prey of the terrible shall be delivered. For I will contend with him that contendeth with thee, and I will save thy children. Isaiah 49:25. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. He shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers. The last promise of the Old Testament, the final sentence before 400 years of silence, is about a family being turned back toward each other. Of all the things God could have chosen to leave hanging in the air, He chose this one. That should tell you how He weighs what you are carrying. And notice the verb, He shall turn. Not you shall persuade. Not you shall find the right words at last. The turning of a child's heart is not an argument you have failed to win. It is an act attributed, in the whole of Scripture, to God alone. That should take something off you, because you have been treating this as a problem you might solve if you were only cleverer or humbler, or if you could find the exact sentence that unlocks it. There is no such sentence. If there were, you would have found it. Nobody has worked harder on this than you have. The promise is unto you, and to your children, and to all that are afar off. Afar off. It is the phrase Peter used in a sermon about people not yet in the room, and it holds for you plainly. The ones at a distance are inside the terms of the promise. The reach is not limited by the silence. So here is what to do with the phone. Keep it close. There is no shame in that. And I will not tell you to stop. But stop reading the silence as a verdict. That is what it has become. Every day of nothing arriving as fresh evidence, and you have been sentencing yourself daily on evidence that proves nothing at all. The father in the story had no information either. Not one letter in all those years. The absence of news was not a message. And keep looking at the road, not anxiously, not checking the window every 10 minutes. Just do not stop looking, because the whole hinge of that story is a man who was still watching after everyone else had reasonably concluded there was nothing to watch for. He was not being foolish. He was being a father, which is a thing that does not switch off when it stops being answered. If the day comes, you will not need the speech you have prepared. You have one. You have rewritten it many times. He will not get through his either. Nobody in that story delivered their prepared remarks, and everybody got what they came for. I will contend with him that contendeth with thee, and I will save thy children. That is not a sentiment. That is the Father declaring himself a party to this, on your side, in a matter you thought you were handling alone. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say, to you. Now the body again, but this time not the slow subtraction, the diagnosis. There is a particular quality to the room where you are told. You will remember details from it that have no business being memorable. The pattern on the chair, a poster about hand-washing, the sound of someone laughing in a corridor outside, which struck you as obscene at the time, and which you have never entirely forgiven. And you will remember that the world divided cleanly into before and after, in the middle of a sentence, with your coat still over your arm. Perhaps it was your own. Perhaps it was said about someone you loved, and you had to drive home afterward and be steady. Either way, you learned the same thing at afternoon, that health is not a possession, it is a loan, and nobody tells you the terms until they are calling it in. What follows is a life reorganized around a schedule you did not choose. The appointments, the tablets, in their plastic compartments marked with the days, which is its own small daily indignity. A box that has to tell you what day it is, because the days no longer distinguish themselves. The tests and the waiting for results, which is a specific kind of suffering that people who have not done it cannot picture. A week in which you are perfectly well and perfectly unable to plan anything. And the vocabulary. You have had to learn a vocabulary. You can pronounce words now that you had never heard before, and you say them casually, and occasionally you notice yourself doing it and think, how did I become fluent in this? But here is what I want to name, because it is the part that goes unspoken. Somewhere in the middle of all that, you began to feel like a case rather than a person. You are asked about your symptoms and never about your afternoon. The conversation is entirely about the failing part, and after long enough, you start to experience yourself that way too, as a body with a problem in it, attended by professionals rather than a person who is unwell, and you are unfailingly polite about all of it. You thank them. You are a good patient. You do not make a fuss, because making a fuss is not who you are, and because some part of you suspects that the ones who complain get worse care. So you carry it well, and everyone says how well you are carrying it, and there is nobody at all to whom you can say the true sentence, which is simply, I am frightened, and I am tired of being brave about this. The woman had been bleeding for 12 years. Mark gives us the medical history in one devastating line. She had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. 12 years of treatments, every remedy anyone suggested. The money gone, and worse at the end of it than at the beginning. But the bleeding was the smaller half of it. Under the law, that condition made her ceremonially unclean, continuously, for 12 years, which meant she could not enter the temple. It meant that anyone she touched became unclean until evening, and anything she sat on. It meant, in practice, that for 12 years nobody had embraced her, no hand on the shoulder, no one sitting close. If she was married when it started, she was almost certainly not married now. 12 years of illness, and 12 years of quarantine on top of it. So when she hears that he is passing through, she does something desperate and, strictly speaking, illegal. She goes into the crowd. Every person she brushes against in that press of bodies is being made unclean by her, without their knowledge or consent, and she knows it, and she goes anyway, because she has run out of every other option, and this is the last one. She does not ask him. That is the detail that tells you what 12 years had done to her. She does not stand in front of him and make her case, the way the synagogue ruler had just done. She comes from behind, in the crowd, and reasons, "If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole." She is trying to be healed without being seen. She wants the cure without the conversation, because the conversation would require her to say aloud, in public, what was wrong with her. And she touches the hem, and it stops. Immediately, Mark says, she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague, and that should be the end of it. She got what she came for. She could have slipped back out through the crowd and gone home, whole and anonymous. But he stops. In the middle of an urgent errand, a 12-year-old girl is dying across town, and her father is standing right there. He stops the entire procession and asks, "Who touched me?" The disciples think it is an absurd question. "The multitude throng thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me?" And he keeps looking around. He is not going to move until she answers. Why? She had her healing. Why make her stand up in front of everybody? Because he was not willing to let her leave as a transaction. She had spent 12 years being a case, a condition that physicians worked on and neighbors avoided, and she had just tried, understandably, to be a case one last time, to get the cure and skip the encounter. And he would not have it. He stopped a crowd and held up a dying child's rescue so that a woman nobody had touched in 12 years could be looked at and spoken to and given a name, daughter. That is what he called her, the only person he ever addressed that way in all 4 Gospels. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where she stood, fluent in your own condition, well cared for and entirely unseen, hoping to get through this without having to say the true sentence out loud. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "For I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds, saith the Lord, because they called thee an outcast, saying, This is Zion, whom no man seeketh after." Jeremiah 30:17, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles." Psalm 103, 2-5. "But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." Isaiah 53:5, and said, "If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and wilt give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee." Exodus 15:26. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. I will restore health unto thee, and heal thee of thy wounds, saith the Lord. Both halves, health and the wounds. And the wounds in that verse are not the illness. Read the rest of it in Jeremiah, and you find God speaking to a people whose injury was that no man seeketh after her. They were sick, and they were forgotten while they were sick. And he addresses the forgetting as its own wound requiring its own healing. That is what the woman in the crowd received. She got the body mended in an instant, and then she got the other thing, the being seen. And he considered the second important enough to stop everything for. Now, I will not tell you what the promise means for your particular diagnosis. I do not know, and any voice that claims to know is selling something. Some are healed in this life, some are not and are no less loved, and no less inside the promise. Job was not spared his boils by being righteous, and Paul asked 3 times about his thorn, and was told no. But look at the psalm, because David lists it carefully, and the list is doing something. Who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies. The healing is in the middle. It is surrounded on both sides by things that do not depend on the outcome of your treatment. Forgiveness before it, crowning after it. Whatever happens in the middle of that list, the beginning and the end are settled, and they were settled before you walked into that room with your coat over your arm. So here is what to do with the box of tablets. When you open the compartment for the day, say the day out loud. Not as a complaint, as a fact you are choosing to hold rather than be handed. It is a very small act of remaining a person inside a schedule you did not choose, and find one human being, one to whom you can say the true sentence. Not the doctor, not the child you are protecting. Someone who will not try to fix it and will not flinch. If there is nobody, say it to him, out loud, in your own words, in the room you are in. I am frightened, and I am tired of being brave about this. That is not a failure of faith. That is the woman coming out of the crowd and telling him all the truth, which is precisely the thing he stopped the world to wait for. And with his stripes, we are healed. Whatever else is uncertain, that transaction is finished. The wounds that bought it were real ones, on a real afternoon, and they were not somebody else's. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Let us talk about money, since almost nobody will. Not greed, not the love of it. The plain, grinding fact of not having enough of it late in life, which is one of the loneliest conditions there is, because it is the one thing that respectable people are least able to say aloud. Perhaps it was a pension that turned out to be worth a fraction of the promise, perhaps a business that went down in a bad year or a bad decade. Perhaps you were careful your whole life, and then an illness came through the household, like weather, and took the savings with it, and there was nothing careless about it at all. Perhaps you lent money to someone you loved, and both of you have agreed never to mention it again. And now you do arithmetic in the aisle. That is the specific indignity, standing in front of a shelf at your age with your history, calculating, putting a thing back, choosing the smaller size, working out whether the heating can go on today or whether a jumper will do, and settling on the jumper more often than anyone knows. Nobody knows. That is the second half of it. Because you are of a generation that considers money a private matter and debt a personal failing, you have become extremely skilled at concealment. You decline invitations that have a cost attached, and you invent a reason. You insist you are not hungry. You buy the grandchildren something anyway, and go short for a fortnight afterward, and would do it again. And the worst of it is not the going without. You are tougher than that. You have gone without before. The worst of it is the shame, the low, persistent sense that a competent person would have arranged things better, and that everyone else your age is comfortable. and that this is a verdict on how you conducted your life. Let me say plainly, it is not. Most of what determines this was decided by markets, illnesses, employers, and accidents, none of which consulted you. You are not a fool. You are a person to whom things happened. But shame does not listen to arithmetic. Shame only listens to a voice with more authority than itself. Job lost everything in a single afternoon, and the text is almost brutal about the pacing. 4 messengers. Each one arrives while the previous one is still speaking. While he was yet speaking, there came also another, 4 times over, so that there is no gap in which to absorb any of it. The oxen and donkeys taken, the servants killed, the sheep and the shepherds burned, the camels raided, and then the last man with the sons and daughters, all of them, in one house, in one wind. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. He was the greatest of all the men of the east, and by evening he was a man sitting in ashes, scraping himself with a piece of broken pottery. Then his friends come, and for 7 days they do the only wise thing anyone does in the entire book. They sit with him on the ground and say nothing, because they saw that his grief was very great. And then they open their mouths, and 35 chapters of theology follow, and every word of it is aimed at one conclusion. Job, you must have done something. Eliphaz says it gently at first. Who ever perished, being innocent? Bildad says it more sharply. Zophar says it cruelly. And what they are constructing, chapter after chapter, is the argument that his ruin is a verdict on his life. That is the real suffering in the book of Job, not the loss of the property. That happened in a day. The suffering is the months afterward, sitting in the ash heap, being told by decent religious men that this is what he deserved, and having no way to disprove it. He almost breaks under it. Read chapter 29, and you will hear a man doing exactly what you do, remembering who he used to be. When I went out to the gate through the city, when I prepared my seat in the street, the young men saw me and hid themselves, and the aged arose and stood up. He is not boasting. He is grieving a name and a standing and a competence, sitting in the dirt, itemizing what he was. And when God finally speaks out of the whirlwind, he does not answer the question. Not one word about why. He asks Job 70 questions about wild goats and ostriches and the foundations of the earth, and somehow that is enough, and Job puts his hand on his mouth. But look at what happens at the very end, and look at when it happens. The Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. Not when he repented. He had done that already. When he prayed for the 3 men who had spent 35 chapters telling him his ruin was his own fault. And then his relatives arrive, the same ones who had been absent for the entire disaster. And they eat bread with him in his house, and every man gave him a piece of money. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where he stood, not in the ash heap of a single afternoon, but in the long argument afterward, defending a life that does not need defending. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. Also, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came there unto him all his brethren, and all his sisters, and all they that had been of his acquaintance before, and did eat bread with him in his house. And they bemoaned him, and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one an earring of gold. So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, and 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. Job 42:10-12. But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:19. I have been young, and now am old. Yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. Psalm 37:25. Then Isaac sowed in that land, and received in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. Genesis 26:12. Did you hear it? Those were not my words, they never were. My God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory. Read the standard by which the supply is measured, not according to your prudence, not according to what you manage to put aside, according to his riches. The scale of the supply has been detached from the scale of your resources entirely, which is the only arrangement under which a person in your position could have any hope at all. And Paul, who wrote that, was in prison and dependent on a gift from a poor church when he wrote it. He was not a comfortable man theorizing about provision. He had learned, he says a few verses earlier, both how to be abased and how to abound, in that order, from the bottom up. I have been young, and now am old. Yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken. David is not promising wealth. He is a man looking back over a long life and reporting what he observed, that the sustaining did not fail, not that it was generous, not that it was early, that it did not fail. You have your own version of that testimony, though you may not have counted it. Something arrived. A neighbor turned up with more than they needed of something. A bill came in lower than you had braced for. Work appeared in a week when it should not have. You have called those coincidences and moved on because you have been busy being ashamed. Go back and count them. Not to feel better, to be accurate. You have been keeping a very careful ledger of the shortfalls, and no ledger at all of the arrivals, and a man who keeps one book and not the other is not being humble. He is being wrong. Now, the aisle. Next time you are standing there doing the arithmetic, and you will be, I want you to do it as a steward and not as a defendant. There is no shame whatsoever in the calculation itself. Choosing the smaller size is competence. It is the same skill that got your family through decades, and it was admirable then, and it is admirable now. And the only thing that has changed is that you have started reading it as evidence against yourself. It is not evidence. Job's friends were wrong. They were eloquent and they were sincere. And God said at the end that they had not spoken of him, the thing that was right. And when the help comes, and it will come through a person, it nearly always comes through a person. Take it. Take it the way Job took the pieces of money from his relatives, without a speech, without insisting on paying it back next month. Let somebody love you inefficiently. You have spent 50 years being the one who gives. Being on the other end of it is not a demotion. It is the same transaction viewed from the seat you are less used to. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say. To you, there is a loss that is quieter than all the others, and it is the loss of expectation, not faith. You still believe. That is not in question, and it never has been. What went is smaller and more practical, the sense that something good might be coming. You used to have that. It was not optimism exactly. It was a low background assumption that the future contained things that there would be developments, arrivals, news worth telling. It made you open the post with mild interest. It made Mondays feel different from Thursdays. And now the future has flattened out. You can describe next year, and it looks exactly like this year, and the year after looks the same. Not bad. That is the thing. It is not a bad life, and you would be ashamed to call it one. It is simply a life with the horizon painted on. Hope deferred maketh the heart sick, the proverb says, and that is a medical observation rather than a poetic one. There is a real injury that comes from wanting something for a long time and repeatedly not getting it. And the injury is this: eventually, you stop wanting it, on purpose, as a defensive measure. You learn to want less so that there is less to be disappointed about. You did that gradually, and you did it sensibly, and you probably think of it as maturity. Some of it was, but some of it was an amputation, and you performed it on yourself, without anesthetic, over about 15 years. And so now you are careful. When someone says something might happen, a visit, a test result, a change, you notice yourself declining to picture it. You say, "We'll see." You keep your expectations low and tidy, the way you keep everything else. And you have got so good at it that you no longer experience it as sad. That is the condition I want to speak to. Not despair. Despair is loud, and people notice it. This is the other thing, the flat, quiet, competent version, where a person simply stops leaning forward. The man who wrote the sentence about mercies being new every morning was standing in the ruins of his own city. We should be clear about what Lamentations is. It is not a devotional composed in a study. It is 5 poems written by a man who had watched the siege of Jerusalem, 18 months of it, and then the breach, and then the burning. He had seen what happens in a city where the food runs out. He writes about it, and I will not repeat the details here, but they are in chapter 4, and they are the worst sentences in the Bible. And the poems are constructed with a terrible discipline. They are acrostics. Each stanza begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet, in order all the way through. Think about what it takes to do that with grief, to sit down in the ash of everything you love and impose an alphabet on it. It is a man refusing to let the horror become formless. If he cannot control what happened, he will at least control the shape of the saying of it. Chapter 3 is the longest and most rigid of them, 3 verses for every letter, 66 verses of it, and he begins it with the worst account of God he can give. I am the man that hath seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He hath led me, and brought me into darkness, but not into light. He builds it up relentlessly for 19 verses, and it culminates in a sentence that ought to shock us more than it does. My strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. That is verse 18. Hope gone. Stated flatly by a prophet in Scripture without correction. And then verse 21. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. Nothing has changed. The city is still down. The people are still dead. Nothing has been fixed between verse 18 and verse 21, and no new information has arrived. What has happened is that he made himself remember something. This I recall to my mind, and the remembering was a deliberate act performed against the evidence in front of him. It is the mercies of the Lord that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. He is not saying he feels hopeful. Read it again. He is saying, here is a thing that is true, regardless of what I feel, and I am going to place my mind on it, because my feelings have run out, and this has not. And the mourning is the key to it. Not because mournings are pleasant. His were not. But because a mourning is the one thing that arrives whether or not you arranged for it. It requires nothing from you. You do not have to be well, or believing, or brave. It simply comes, and it comes again, and each one is loaded, and it kept coming through the entire siege. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where he stood, with your alphabet, keeping the shape of things, having quietly written your own verse 18 some time ago. And this is what the Father says to you in his own words. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. Lamentations 3:21-24. Now the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that ye may abound in hope, through the power of the Holy Ghost. Romans 15:13. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Jeremiah 29:11. Hope deferred maketh the heart sick, but when the desire cometh, it is a tree of life. Proverbs 13:12. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Now the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing. The God of hope. Not the God who requires hope from you, the God who has it, who is its source, who is described as holding the property himself. That distinction matters enormously to a person who has run out. You are not being asked to generate this. You are being told where the supply is kept. And note the last phrase, which most people skip, that ye may abound in hope, through the power of the Holy Ghost. Through power. Paul classifies hope as something requiring divine power to produce in a human being. He does not think of it as a mood or a temperament. He thinks of it as a work, which means the flatness you have been quietly ashamed of is not a character flaw. You have been trying to manufacture, out of your own worn-down resources, a thing that Scripture says requires the power of God to make. I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. An expected end. There is an end that is expected, and it is expected by him, held in his mind, already thought toward you. Your horizon may be painted on. His is not. He is looking at something specific. So here is the practical thing, and I want you to do it exactly and not approximately. Tomorrow, when you wake, whenever that is, at whatever hour your body chooses, before you get up, before the list of the day assembles itself, say one sentence, "This is a new mercy, and I have not spent it yet." That is all. You are not required to feel it. Jeremiah did not feel it. He wrote verse 18, and then he wrote verse 21. And the distance between them was crossed by a decision, not a feeling. And then, at some point in the day, let yourself want something. One thing, small enough to survive. Picture it, properly, the way you used to picture things before you learned not to. You will feel the old defensive flinch, the "we'll see," the tidy, low expectation. And I am asking you to overrule it once. You are not being naive. You are being obedient to a proverb. When the desire cometh, it is a tree of life. Trees are slow. Trees are also the longest-lived things in the visible world, and they grow, almost entirely, in weather nobody would describe as promising. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say, to you. Now the loss of place, of home, which is not the same as the loss of a house. Perhaps you moved. Perhaps it was sensible. The stairs, the garden, the cost of heating rooms nobody sits in. Everybody agreed it was for the best. And they were right. And you knew they were right. And you signed the papers. And you did not tell anyone that you drove past it afterward. More than once. That you slowed down to see whether the new people had kept the roses. Or perhaps you are still in it, and it is the house that changed. It is the same rooms, and the same view, and the same sound the third stair makes, and it is not home any more, because home was never the building. Home was a particular person moving around in it, and when they went, the house stayed, and the home left. And now you are living inside a very accurate model of a place you used to live. There is a specific evening feeling here, and I will not name any hour, but you know the one. The house is quiet in a way that is not restful. You catch yourself listening for a sound that is not going to be made. A key, a cough from another room, someone asking whether you have seen the scissors. 50 years of that sound, and its absence has a shape. And there is the other version, which is loneliest of all. You have a place to live and no place to belong. A flat that is perfectly adequate. A room in a good facility where the staff are kind and everything is clean and nothing is yours. People visit. They are lovely. They leave, and you hear the car, and the corridor goes quiet, and you sit in a chair in a room that has your things in it, and none of your life. Everybody knows about homesickness in the young. Nobody talks about it in the old. But it is the same complaint exactly. A person in the wrong place, wanting a right place they can picture in detail and cannot reach. And the cruel part is that you cannot even name what you want. If someone asked, you could not point at it. Not the old house. You know that place is gone even if the bricks are standing. What you want is not a location at all. What you want is to be somewhere that knows you. Ruth stood at a crossroads on a road out of Moab and did something with no rational justification whatsoever. Consider her position. She is a widow. Her husband is dead, and so is her brother-in-law, and so is her father-in-law. She is childless. She is Moabite, which mattered enormously. There was a specific ancient hostility between Moab and Israel, and a law in Deuteronomy naming Moabites as excluded from the congregation. And her mother-in-law, Naomi, is going home to Bethlehem, and is telling both her daughters-in-law to turn back. She is not being cold. She is being realistic, and her argument is devastating in its practicality. She asks them whether, even if she still had hope of a husband and could yet bear sons, they would truly wait until those sons were grown. Orpah takes the sensible option. She kisses Naomi and goes back to her mother's house, and I want to say clearly that Orpah is not the villain of this story. She did the reasonable thing. She went home to a family, a people, a language, a temple, and a chance of remarriage. Ruth clave unto her, and then she says the sentence, and every word of it is a door closing behind her. Whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. She is renouncing nationality, religion, family, and any prospect of security, in favor of an old bitter woman with nothing to offer her. They arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest, and the town is stirred, and the women say, "Is this Naomi?" And Naomi answers with the hardest line in the book, "Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, call me bitter, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again, empty." She says that standing next to Ruth, empty, with the most loyal person in the entire Old Testament, standing at her elbow. That is what grief does to the arithmetic. It does not count what is present. And so Ruth goes out to glean, which was the ancient welfare provision. The poor were permitted to follow the reapers and take what was dropped. It is exhausting, humiliating work, and dangerous for a foreign woman alone in a field. And her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, which is the writer's way of saying, this looked exactly like an accident. What follows is not a romance in the modern sense. It is a legal proceeding. Boaz is a kinsman redeemer, and there is a nearer kinsman with prior claim, and there is a transaction at the town gate involving 10 elders and a sandal. It is all very procedural. But underneath the procedure, something is being repaired that no procedure could touch. And at the end of it, the women of the town say to Naomi, to the woman who said, "Call me bitter," "Thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons." And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where Naomi stood, home again in the right town at the right time of year, doing the arithmetic of emptiness with someone loyal standing right beside you. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words, "For I will take you from among the heathen, and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean. From all your filthiness, and from all your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you an heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments, and do them. And ye shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and ye shall be my people, and I will be your God." Ezekiel 36:24-28. God setteth the solitary in families. He bringeth out those which are bound with chains, but the rebellious dwell in a dry land. Psalm 68:6. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. John 14:2-3. And the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. Ruth 4:14-15. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. God setteth the solitary in families, not houses, families. He is not, in that verse, promising you an address. He is promising a belonging, which is the thing you could not name when I asked you to point at it. And notice how it happened for Naomi. She did not get her husband back. She did not get her sons back. What she got was a Moabite widow who would not leave, a distant relative who noticed, and a baby laid in her lap by the neighbors. The restoration did not restore the original. It built something else in the same place, out of people who had no obligation to her at all. That is nearly always the mechanism. The solitary are not usually set in the family they lost. They are set in one they would not have chosen and could not have foreseen. A neighbor, a widowed friend. Someone from the church who turns out to be as alone as you are. A young person who inexplicably likes your company. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you, a place prepared, meaning specific, meaning fitted, meaning not a general provision for a crowd, but an accommodation made ready with somebody in mind. When Jesus wanted to comfort men who were about to lose everything familiar, that is the image he reached for. Not a reward, not a rank. A room in a house belonging to his Father, with their name effectively on the door. You have known that feeling. Walking into a place and finding it prepared for you. Someone had put the kettle on. Someone knew which chair you would want. It is a small human thing, and it is the closest thing on earth to what he is describing. So, practically, 2 things. First, stop apologizing for driving past the old house. There is nothing morbid in it. You are visiting a place where a great deal of your life still lives, and you are allowed. Go when you want to. Look at the roses. Second, and harder, let the new place be entered. Not admired, not tolerated, entered. Put the thing on the wall, not the box of things, not eventually. One thing, this week, at the height where you can see it from the chair. It is a very small act of consenting to be somewhere. A father of the fatherless and a judge of the widows is God in his holy habitation. That title is not decorative. In a world with no state provision, the fatherless and the widow were the 2 categories of person with no legal advocate, nobody whose job it was to stand up for them. God assigns himself that role by name, in the psalm, on purpose. You are not without an advocate. You are not without a place. And the arithmetic of emptiness that you have been running is being done, as Naomi's was, with the answer already standing at your elbow. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say. To you. There is something that has gone quiet, and you have not told anyone. Because of all the things on this list, it is the one that feels most like a failure. Your prayers have gone thin, not stopped. You still pray. You say the words at the meal, and you say something before rest, and you pray when the news is bad. But it has become a transmission rather than a conversation, and you cannot remember when it changed. There was a time when it was not like this. You remember praying with expectation, actually expecting an answer, actually leaning in. And now you say the words, and they seem to stop at the ceiling, and you finish, and there is a small embarrassed pause, and you get on with the day. Some of it is repetition. You have prayed for the same 3 people for 11 years. There's only so long a person can bring the same request before the bringing becomes a ritual with the life gone out of it. You know exactly what you are going to say before you say it, and so, you suspect, does he. And some of it is worse than that, and I will say it because you will not. Some of it is that you asked for something enormous, once, with everything you had, and you did not get it. And you did not lose your faith over it. You are not that kind of person, and anyway, you understand that God is not a machine that dispenses outcomes. But something recalibrated quietly afterward. You began to ask for less. You began to pray in a way that could not be disappointed, which means, if you are honest, you began to pray in a way that did not really ask. And now, there are the days when you cannot pray at all. When you sit down to do it, and there is simply nothing, no words, no feeling, not even the raw material of a request. Just a tired person in a chair, with their hands together out of habit. That is the one that frightens you. Not doubt. You could handle doubt. Doubt at least has content. This is the absence of anything to say to someone you have spoken to every day for 60 years, and it feels like the beginning of a distance you do not want to measure. Hannah's lips moved and no sound came out, and we have already seen how that was misread. But there is another prayer in Scripture that had no words at all, and it is the one I want to put in front of you. Elijah under the juniper tree. Understand what came immediately before it. Mount Carmel, the single most spectacular public vindication of God in the entire Old Testament. 450 prophets of Baal. An altar drenched 3 times with water until the trench was full, and then fire falling from heaven and consuming the sacrifice. The wood, the stones, the dust, and the water in the trench. And all the people fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, He is the God." He won, completely, publicly, unambiguously. And then Jezebel sent one messenger with one threat, and this man, who had just called down fire, ran for a day into the wilderness and sat under a juniper tree and asked to die. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life. That is the sequence, and it is not a story about a weak man. It is a story about what happens after the great effort. The collapse does not come during the crisis. It comes on the other side of it, when the adrenaline has drained out and there is nothing left to spend. And then he lies down under the tree, and God's response to the prophet's request to die is one of the most tender things in Scripture, and it contains no theology whatsoever. An angel touches him and says, "Arise and eat." There's a cake baked on the coals and a jar of water. He eats and lies down again. He does not even manage a conversation. And the angel comes a second time and touches him again and says, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. 2 meals and rest." That is the entire divine intervention. No rebuke for the request to die. No lecture about how he had just seen fire fall from heaven and ought to know better. Food, water, and permission to be exhausted. And afterwards, days afterwards at Horeb, comes the famous part. The great and strong wind rending the mountains, and the Lord was not in the wind. The earthquake, and the Lord was not in the earthquake. The fire, and the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. A still small voice. The Hebrew is stranger and better than that. A sound of thin silence. The one thing you could not hear at all, unless everything else had stopped. The man who had called down fire in front of a nation found God in the thin silence afterward. And the question the voice asked him was not doctrinal. It was, "What doest thou here, Elijah?" Which is not an accusation. It is what you say to someone you have come a long way to find. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where he stood, on the other side of the great effort, with no words left, in a silence you have been reading as absence. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me, and heard my cry. He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. And he hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear, and shall trust in the Lord. Psalm 41:3. Likewise the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities. For we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings, which cannot be uttered. Romans 8:26. I love the Lord, because he hath heard my voice and my supplications. Because he hath inclined his ear unto me, therefore will I call upon him as long as I live. Psalm 116:102. And it shall come to pass, that before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24. Did you hear it? Those were not my words, they never were. He inclined unto me, and heard my cry. Inclined. It is the word for leaning over, the posture of a man bending toward a sound too faint to make out from where he was standing. David does not describe a God who receives transmissions. He describes one who leans in. And then Paul says the thing that ought to settle this entirely. We know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Read that slowly, because it is doing something extraordinary. Paul is not addressing people who pray badly. He says, we know not what we should pray for as we ought. All of us, as a standing condition. And his solution is not better technique. His solution is that the Spirit takes what cannot be uttered and utters it. Groanings which cannot be uttered. That is your Tuesday. That is the tired person in the chair, with their hands together and nothing to say. Paul does not classify that as prayer failing. He classifies it as the point at which prayer is taken over by someone more competent. So the silence you have been reading as distance is, in the actual mechanics described here, the place where the work passes into other hands. And before they call, I will answer. And while they are yet speaking, I will hear. Before. The answering has, in some sense, that does not fit in a human sentence, already begun on the far side of the asking. Whatever is happening, when you cannot pray, absence is not the correct name for it. Now, the 11 years of the same 3 people. Do not stop, but change one thing. Stop making the case. You have been praying like an advocate, assembling the argument, presenting the merits, as though the outcome depended on the quality of your presentation. That is exhausting, and it is why the repetition has worn you out. He is not being persuaded. He is not on the other side of this. Say the names, just the names. That is a complete prayer, and it is the one Paul is describing, and it has the advantage of being sustainable for another 11 years, if that is what is required. And the days when there is nothing at all, sit there anyway, hands together, out of habit, in the room you are in. You are not performing, and you are not required to produce. He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. Notice that David is entirely passive in that sentence. Every verb is God's. The man in the pit contributed nothing to his own extraction, except being in it. Eat something. Drink some water. The journey is too great for thee. And he said that first. And he said it before he said anything else. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now, something harder to admit than any of the others, because it sounds like a complaint against God Himself. You used to understand. Not everything. Nobody understands everything. But there was a coherence to it. You read the passage and it opened. You went through a hard season, and afterwards you could see, more or less, what it had been for. The pieces made a picture, and the picture had a direction, and you could have explained it to a younger person and meant every word. And somewhere in the last stretch, the picture stopped assembling. Too much has happened that does not fit. A good person went early, and a cruel one is still going. A prayer that was clearly right, for a child's marriage, for a friend's tumor, was refused without explanation. And you did not become bitter, because that is not who you are. What you became was quiet. You still read, but you read the way a man reads a language he learned long ago and has not spoken in years. You know it is saying something. You can construe the sentences, and the meaning stays just on the other side of a pane of glass. And in church, or on the program you listen to, someone explains it. They are confident. They have 3 points about why suffering happens, and they seem entirely satisfied with them. And you sit there and think, you have not buried anyone yet. That is the loneliness in this movement. It is not doubt. Doubt would be easier to talk about, and there is a whole vocabulary for it. This is the loss of the sense that it hangs together while continuing entirely to believe. You are a person with unshaken faith and no working map, and there is almost nobody you can say that to, because the ones with the map will try to hand you theirs, and it does not fit your ground. You do not want an explanation. You have heard the explanations. What you want is to see again. 2 of them were walking to Emmaus, and Luke tells us it was about 7 miles, which is a long time to be wrong about something. It is the 3rd day. The crucifixion is behind them, and they are leaving Jerusalem, going home, which is what people do when a thing is finished. And they are talking it over, the way you talk over a disaster afterwards, going through it again and again, looking for the place where it might have gone differently. And Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were holden that they should not know him. Consider that sentence. He is not merely unrecognized. Luke says something was actively preventing the recognition. This is not their failure of attention. Something was held, and he asks them what they are discussing, and they stop being sad. Then one of them says a line that is almost unbearable once you see what it contains. We trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. We trusted. Past tense. That is a man giving an account of a hope he has finished with, to the person the hope was about, on the 3rd day, when it had already come true. They have all the information. They tell him about the women at the sepulchre, about the vision of angels, about the men who went and found the tomb empty. They know every fact of the resurrection, and they are walking away from Jerusalem in the wrong direction, sad, because facts are not sight. And what he does next is not what we would expect. He does not reveal himself. He could have ended their grief in a second, and instead, he gives them a 7-mile Bible study. Beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Hours of it. Walking. The whole framework rebuilt from the beginning, with the sadness still in place the entire time. Then they reach the village, and he made as though he would have gone further. He does not impose himself. They have to ask, "Abide with us," and he goes in. And then the moment. He sat at meat with them. He took bread, and blessed it, and brake, and gave to them. And their eyes were opened, and they knew him. Not during the exposition. Not at the explanation, at a table, in an ordinary house, in the small domestic act of a guest breaking bread, which he should not have been doing at all, since he was the guest and not the host. They said afterwards, "Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way?" The burning had been happening for 7 miles. They only identified it afterwards, looking back. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where they stood, walking the wrong way with all the facts, sad with the burning going on unnoticed in your chest. And this is what the Father says to you. In his own words, he answered and said, "Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that, whereas I was blind, now I see." John 9:25. "Open thou mine eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law." Psalm 119:18. "And their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished out of their sight." Luke 24:31. "And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha." 2 Kings 6:17. "Did you hear it? Those were not my words, they never were. One thing I know, that, whereas I was blind, now I see. That is the whole testimony of the man born blind, and it is worth noticing what it is not. The Pharisees interrogated him twice, brought in his parents, demanded a theological account of who had done it, and by what authority, and whether the man was a sinner. And he refuses every one of those questions. Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. He will not be drawn into the framework. He holds on to the one thing he has, which is not an explanation, but an experience, and it turns out to be enough to withstand the entire religious establishment. You have that too. Whatever has stopped making sense, there is a floor underneath it. Things that happen to you, that you did not imagine, that no argument reaches. Open thou mine eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law. The psalmist is not asking for information. He is asking for sight, and he is asking for it while holding the book. The text was already in front of him, complete and correct, and he prayed that prayer anyway, because he understood that having the words and seeing them are 2 different operations. That is the prayer for the pane of glass. Not, "Give me answers, open my eyes." And then Elisha at Dothan, with the Syrian army around the city, and his servant panicking, and the old prophet praying, "Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see." And the young man's eyes are opened, and the mountain is full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. The chariots were already there. That is the whole point of the scene, and it is easy to miss. Nothing was summoned, nothing arrived. The hillside was exactly as crowded before the prayer as after it. The only thing that changed was the servant's capacity to perceive what was already the case. So here is what to do, and it is deliberately modest. Stop trying to make it hang together. That project is over. And it is not a failure of yours that it ended. It was always a scaffolding you built to stand on, and you have outgrown the height it reaches. The people with the 3 confident points about suffering have not stopped building yet. They will. Instead, keep walking and keep talking to him about it. That is exactly what those 2 men were doing. They were sad, they were wrong, they were going the wrong way, and they were discussing it with him the entire time, without knowing it, and the burning was already underway. And watch the table, rather than the argument. It was bread in the end, not the exposition, something small and ordinary and shared. Your eyes were holden. That is a passive verb, and it means somebody is holding them, and it means at some point somebody lets go. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. There's a state you may not have thought to grieve, because it went so long ago that you have stopped comparing. You have not been at rest in a very long time. Not rest in the sense of sitting down. You sit down a great deal. Rest in the older sense, the absence of that low hum of vigilance that runs underneath everything. The state of not bracing. You are braced. You have been braced for years. It shows in small ways you would not connect. The way the telephone makes your chest tighten before you know who it is. The way you wake and the list assembles itself before your eyes are properly open. The way you cannot watch a program without the other half of your mind running its inventory. The appointment, the money, the person you have not heard from, the thing you have been meaning to sort out and cannot face. Some of that came from real emergencies. If you have spent years as a carer, or nursed someone through a long illness, or raised a family through a hard stretch, you learned vigilance because vigilance was required. You became the person who noticed things early. It was a skill, and it probably saved somebody. But nobody taught you how to put it down, and the emergency ended, and the vigilance did not. So now there is no off. You have rest available to you, hours of it, more than you have had in decades, and you cannot enter it. You sit in a quiet room, in a quiet life, and your body behaves as though something is about to happen, and you call it being tired, but tiredness is what happens after exertion, and this is what happens instead of it. And I think there is a spiritual version of the same thing that you would be slow to admit. You cannot quite rest in Him either. You believe He is good. You would defend it against anyone. But you find yourself keeping half an eye on the situation anyway. The way you would with a competent colleague, you nonetheless prefer to double-check. Not distrust exactly, just an inability to fully hand it over. That is a wound too. It is the wound of having been the one who had to hold everything for so long that holding became the only posture you know. There is a boat on the Sea of Galilee with a man asleep in the stern. Mark gives the detail that the other Gospels leave out. He was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow, a cushion, the steersman's cushion, the one weighted seat in a fishing boat. He had taken the most practical resting place available and used it. That sea sits about 700 feet below sea level, in a basin ringed by hills, and the wind comes down through the ravines with no warning. Fishermen knew this. The men in that boat were professionals. At least 4 of them had worked that water their entire adult lives. And Mark says the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. Full, not taking water. Full. These are men who know exactly how much water a boat can hold and still float, and they have passed that number. And he was asleep. They wake him with a question that is not really a question. Master, carest thou not that we perish? That is not a request for help. That is an accusation, and it is the accusation of exhausted people who have been bailing with their hands while somebody else rested. You have said that sentence, not in those words, but you have said it in a hospital corridor, or on a bad afternoon with the paperwork spread out, or at some point in the last 5 years when the water was coming in faster than you could put it out. Do you not care? He arose, and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Two things about that. The first is that the words he uses to the storm are the same kind of words he uses to demons elsewhere in Mark. It is not a weather adjustment. It is an authority being exercised over something that had no business threatening those men. The second is the sequence. He was asleep in the storm before he stilled it. He was at rest inside the conditions, not after them. The calm that came at the end was, in a sense, only the external version of something that had already been present in the stern of that boat the whole time. And then he asks them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? Which sounds harsh until you notice what they do next. They feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? They are more frightened after the rescue than during the storm, because a storm is only a storm, and they knew what to do with one. But a person who can speak to one is a different order of problem entirely. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where they stood, in a boat that is full, having been bailing with your hands for a very long time, with the accusation ready in your mouth. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. John 14:27. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. Isaiah 26:3. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6-7. The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. Psalm 29:11. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Not as the world giveth. The world's peace is a set of conditions. The results were clear, the money came through, everybody is well at the moment. It is peace by circumstance, and it lasts precisely as long as the circumstances do, which is why you have never been able to keep hold of it. He is describing something issued rather than achieved. My peace I give. It is handed over, like an object, from a man who at that moment was hours away from Gethsemane and knew it. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Stayed, propped, leaned, resting its weight. The image is of something heavy set down against something that will bear it. And the Hebrew behind perfect peace is shalom, shalom, the word doubled, which is that language's way of intensifying. Peace, peace, complete, repeated, insisted upon. And then Paul's instruction, which is the most practical sentence in this whole letter. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. Be careful for nothing means be anxious about nothing. And he does not stop at the prohibition, which would be useless. Nobody has ever stopped being anxious by being told to. He gives the replacement action. Let your requests be made known. Transfer them. Move the item from the list you are carrying to the one who is not tired. and the promise attached is oddly military. The peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds. Keep is a garrison word. It means to guard a position with soldiers. He is describing peace as a posted watch, which means the vigilance you have been running yourself into the ground to maintain is being taken over by something that does not need to rest. So, the next time you find yourself braced, in the quiet room, with the inventory running, name the item. Out loud, one item, the actual one at the top. Then say, "This is yours now, and I am off duty on it until I am not." You will pick it up again within the hour. That is all right. Put it down again. Rest of this kind is not a state you achieve once. It is a thing you do repeatedly, the way you set down something heavy, walk a few paces, and set it down again. The Lord will bless His people with peace. It is the last line of that psalm, and the psalm before it is all thunder and cedars breaking, and the voice of the Lord shaking the wilderness. 7 verses of storm, and then that. He does not end on the power. He ends on what the power is for. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now, a loss with a person behind it. Not weather, not illness, not time. Someone did this to you. There is a difference, and you have always known it. Grief you can hand to God. Being wronged sits differently in the body. It has a name and a face attached, and the name arrives unbidden in the middle of ordinary tasks. 30 years later, and your jaw sets before you have decided anything. Perhaps it was money, a business partner, a relative, a solicitor, someone who handled an estate and handled it in their own favor, and everyone said pursuing it would cost more than it was worth, and they were probably right, and it has never stopped being a stone in your shoe. Perhaps it was worse than money. Perhaps someone took years from you directly, a person who should have protected you and did the opposite, and you were young, and you have carried it in silence since before some of your grandchildren were born. Perhaps it was a reputation. Somebody said a thing that was not true, and it traveled, and you never fully got out from under it. You still notice a coolness in a certain family, and you know exactly which sentence, said once in 1979, is the reason. And the injury has a second layer, which is what makes it different from every other loss on this list. Nobody ever admitted it. That is the part that will not close. If they had said it, if one of them had said plainly, "I did that," and it was wrong, you suspect you could have laid it down years ago. Instead, there was denial, or silence, or that particular reframing, where somehow you ended up being the difficult one. So you have had to carry both the theft and the doubt about the theft. You have had to keep a private ledger nobody else acknowledges, and defend it only to yourself, and wonder occasionally whether you have made too much of it. And you have been told to forgive, probably by people who did not know the details, and you have tried, sincerely, more than once, and you have discovered that you can forgive a person and still want the record corrected, and nobody ever explains what to do with that. So you have assumed it means the forgiveness did not take. There was a man in Jericho whom everybody was entitled to despise, and they were not wrong about him. Zacchaeus was chief among the publicans, not a tax collector, the chief of them, which meant he ran a franchise. Rome sold the right to collect, and the collector paid Rome a fixed sum and kept everything above it. And the system was designed to be extortionate. every denarius of his considerable wealth came out of his neighbors' pockets legally under the protection of an occupying army they hated. There is no version of this where he is sympathetic. He was rich because they were poorer. And he wants to see Jesus, and he cannot, because he was little of stature, and the crowd will not let him through. And you may be sure that crowd was not accidentally in his way. So he runs ahead and climbs a sycamore tree, which is a ridiculous thing for a wealthy middle-aged official to do, and it tells you how badly he wanted it. And Jesus stops under the tree and says, "Zacchaeus, make haste, and come down, for today I must abide at thy house." The crowd murmurs immediately. He was gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner, and their objection is entirely reasonable. These are people who had been robbed by him. Some of them had lost farms. And then Zacchaeus, standing there, says the thing. And notice that nobody asked him for it. There is no negotiation in the text, no condition set, no sermon preached at him. He simply says, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold." Fourfold. That is not a generous impulse. That is a legal citation. He is quoting the restitution law, the penalty for a stolen and slaughtered sheep, 4 sheep for one, and applying to himself the harshest schedule in the code, voluntarily in the street. And here is what I want you to see, because it is the reason this story is in this letter. Somewhere in Jericho that evening, there was a man who had lost a field years earlier, and had made his peace with it. He had stopped expecting anything, and there came a knock at his door, and the man who took it was standing there with 4 times the value in his hands. That man is not named in Scripture. His restitution is not described. But it happened. The text requires it to have happened to somebody who had long since written it off, and who had spent years being told that the ledger he kept privately was a burden he ought to set down. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where that unnamed man stood, with an old private ledger, no acknowledgement from anyone, and a knock you had stopped listening for. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. If a man shall steal an ox or a sheep, and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox, and 4 sheep for a sheep. Exodus 22:1. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, forsomuch as he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. Luke 19:8-10. But if he be found, he shall restore 7-fold. He shall give all the substance of his house. Proverbs 6:31. Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee. Zechariah 9:12. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. If he be found, he shall restore 7-fold. He shall give all the substance of his house. That is Proverbs, and it is worth noting the vehemence of it. Scripture does not treat theft as a misfortune to be absorbed by the victim. It treats it as a debt that stands until it is paid, and it sets the repayment high deliberately, so that the loss lands on the one who caused it. Which means the ledger you have been keeping privately is not pettiness. You have been half ashamed of it for years. Do not be. The instinct that says this was taken, and it has never been made right, is not a failure of grace. It is an accurate moral perception, and it agrees with the law of God. Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. That is one of the strangest phrases in the Old Testament, prisoners of hope. Zechariah is speaking to people in captivity, and he does not call them prisoners of Babylon. He calls them prisoners of hope, bound by the fact that something has been promised and therefore cannot be released into simply giving up. And to them, even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee, double, not restored, doubled. So here's what I want to say about forgiveness, because you have been misinformed and it has cost you years. Forgiveness is not the same as canceling the debt. It is the transfer of the debt. It is taking the ledger out of your own hands, where it has been sitting for 30 years, unpaid and unacknowledged, with you as the only clerk, and putting it into the hands of a judge who does not lose paperwork and cannot be lied to. That is why you can forgive and still want the record corrected. You are not defective. Wanting the record corrected is right. What you have been doing wrong is trying to be the one who corrects it, which is a post you were never appointed to, and which has exhausted you. Vengeance is his. That has always been read as a restriction, and it is, you may not. But it is also a commitment. It says the matter will be handled by someone with jurisdiction. So, name it once, not to them, to him. Say what was taken plainly, without minimizing it and without rehearsing the whole case. This is what he took. This is what it cost me. It is yours. And then stop being the clerk. Put the book down. You will pick it up again. The name will arrive in the middle of an ordinary task, and your jaw will set. And each time, put it down again. I restore him fourfold. Somebody in Jericho got a knock on the door years after he had stopped expecting one. The accounting in this world is slow and partial, and often does not arrive at all. It is not the only accounting there is. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Now, the one underneath all the others. Not the losses themselves, the suspicion that grew out of them. You would never say it in these words, but there is a thought that has visited you more than once in the chair, and it goes something like, he has moved on to other people. Not that he does not exist. You have never seriously doubted that. Not even that he is not good. Something more specific and more painful, that his attention, which you once felt so certainly, has been reassigned, that you had your season, that the church you gave 40 years to has a young family in your pew, and a worship band and a program for people at a stage of life you are no longer at, and that this is right and good, and you would not want it otherwise, and that somehow in all of it you became furniture, and you keep going. That is what makes this so quiet. You have not stopped. You still read, still give, still turn up when you are able. But you have begun to think of yourself as someone whose useful chapter closed and who is now in the long appendix. There is a version of this that comes from people too, the ones who used to call, the friendships that were built around shared activity and did not survive the ending of the activity, the relatives who are genuinely fond of you and genuinely busy. Nobody has abandoned you. That is the strange thing. You could not name a single person who did anything wrong. And yet the room is quieter every year, and each departure was reasonable. And the sum of many reasonable departures is a person sitting alone. And then the thought arrives. If this is what it looks like when God is with someone, what would it look like if He were not? I want to sit with that question rather than rush past it, because you have been rushing past it for years, and it has not gone anywhere. It has simply moved to the back and set up house. You have never said it aloud. Not to the minister, not to your children, not to the friend you tell most things to. It feels like the one disloyalty you are not permitted. Say it here. It is not news to Him, and Scripture has language for it that is far blunter than yours. The blunt language belongs to a man hanging on a cross, and he was quoting. That is the detail that changes everything, and most people never notice it. When Jesus cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" he was not composing. He was reciting the first line of the 22nd Psalm, a psalm that had been sung in Israel for 1,000 years, a psalm every Jewish person present would have recognized immediately, the way you would recognize the opening line of a hymn you were raised on. Think about what that means. The most desolate sentence ever spoken by a human being was a quotation from the songbook. It was already in the liturgy. God had put the words for that specific feeling into His people's mouths in advance and included them in Scripture, which means the sense of being forsaken was never a heresy or a failure of faith. It was anticipated. It was provided for. And the psalm he quoted does not stay there. It runs on through the description of dogs and pierced hands and garments divided by lot, and then it turns, "For he hath not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, neither hath he hid his face from him. But when he cried unto him, he heard." A man who begins by asking why he has been forsaken ends by testifying that the face was never hidden. Both are in the same song. Neither cancels the other. But go back further, to the wilderness of Beersheba and a woman sitting a bowshot away from a dying child. Hagar had been sent out with bread and a bottle of water, and the water was gone. She put the boy under a shrub and walked the distance of an arrow's flight and sat down, and said, "Let me not see the death of the child." That is not indifference. That is the specific behavior of a mother who has calculated that she cannot prevent the thing and cannot watch it either. She had been here before, years earlier, at a spring on the road to Shur, and there she had given God a name, "Thou, God, seest me." She had already had that revelation, and here she is again, further into the desert, with a dead end and an empty bottle. And the earlier revelation is not helping her at all. And the text says, God heard the voice of the lad, not her voice. She had spoken. The boy had not, as far as we are told. But God heard him, and an angel called to her out of heaven, and said, "What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard." And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, not made one, opened her eyes. It was there. It had been there the entire time she sat a bowshot away preparing to lose her son. A well within walking distance, invisible to a woman whose eyes were doing what grief does to eyes. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where she stood, a bowshot from what you cannot bear to watch, with an old revelation that has stopped consoling you, near water you cannot see. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words, "For the Lord hath called thee as a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth, when thou wast refused, saith thy God. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy Redeemer. Isaiah 54:6-8. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. Hebrews 13:5. Be strong and of a good courage, fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Deuteronomy 31:6. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Psalm 27:10. Did you hear it? Those were not my words, they never were. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. He says it. That is what I want you to notice first. He does not deny the experience. He does not correct Israel and say you only felt forsaken. He uses the word himself, and he owns the appearance of it. And only then does he put it in proportion, a small moment against great mercies. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee. 2 timescales in one sentence. A moment. Everlasting. He is not arguing that the hiding did not happen. He is telling you how long each thing lasts. And then the sentence in Hebrews, and I want to give you what is actually written, because English translation flattens it. I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. In the Greek, there are 5 separate negatives stacked in that promise. It is emphatic to the point of ungrammatical. Never, not ever, by no means, not at all. It is the most heavily negated promise in the New Testament. Somebody wanted to make it impossible to misread. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. David chooses the 2 people whose leaving is least imaginable and least survivable, and says, even there, even at the end of the list of people who cannot possibly go when they have gone. Now. That thought you have never said aloud. You are not required to stop having it. Bring it into the open instead, where it does less damage. Say it plainly in the room you are in. I have felt put aside, and I do not know what to do with that. He has heard it before from better men than either of us, and he put the words in the songbook himself, so they would be available when someone needed them. And then go and look for the well. Not metaphorically, actually. Hagar's rescue was not a change in her circumstances. The bread was still gone. The desert was still the desert. What changed was that her eyes were open to something already within reach. And, in my experience, the well is almost always a person, and usually a person you have written off as unimportant. The neighbor who is too chatty, the young man at the shop, the one from church who telephones, and whom you have been letting go to voicemail because you have not the energy for the conversation. Answer it next time. That is the whole assignment. You are not in the appendix. You are in the part of the book where the writing gets slower and more deliberate, and where whatever the author has been building toward begins, finally, to become visible. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. Let us now speak about the question you have stopped asking out loud. What am I for? You had an answer once and never had to think about it. You were for the children. You were for the work. You were for the person who needed you, and the answer was so obvious that the question never formed. Purpose is like health that way. You only notice it when it is gone. And now the children are grown and mostly fine. The work belongs to someone else. The person you cared for has died, and you cared for them well, and the strange, terrible truth that no one warns you about is that when the caring ended, you did not only lose them. You lost your job. You lost the reason to get up at a particular time and the shape that reason gave to a day. So there is a silence in the mornings that is not peaceful, and people say, "Enjoy your retirement," or "You've earned a rest," and they mean it warmly, and it lands like a dismissal, because you did not want a rest. You wanted to be needed. Those are different things entirely, and it is astonishing how few people know it. There is also the arithmetic, which you do more often than you admit. You are aware of roughly how much road is left. Not morbidly. You are simply a realistic person who can count. And what the arithmetic produces is not fear so much as a kind of hurry with nowhere to go, a sense that whatever was meant to be done with this life has either been done or is now out of reach, and that what remains is administration. And there is the particular ache of watching someone younger do badly a thing you could do well, and saying nothing. I do not think you want a hobby. People keep suggesting hobbies. What you want is weight. Something that would matter if you did not do it. Something with consequence attached. That is not vanity, and it is not restlessness. It is the correct instinct of a creature made for work, in a body that has been retired by everyone except its maker. Caleb was 85 years old, and he wanted a mountain with giants on it. The context is everything here. 45 years earlier, he had been one of the 12 sent to spy out the land, and one of only 2 who came back saying it could be done. The other 10 brought back an evil report about walled cities and men of great stature, and the people believed the 10, and the whole nation turned back into the desert for 40 years because of it. So Caleb spent his 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s walking in circles in a wilderness as a punishment for a vote he did not cast. Consider that. He was right. He was demonstrably, publicly right, and he was overruled. And then he served out the entire sentence alongside the people who had overruled him. Every one of those 40 years, he was watching a generation die off in the sand for a decision he had opposed. There is not one word of complaint from him anywhere in the record. And then Joshua is dividing the land, and this old man walks up and makes a speech, and it is the best speech any octogenarian has ever given. Behold, the Lord hath kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years. And now, lo, I am this day 85 years old. As yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now for war, both to go out and to come in. And then the request. He does not ask for a comfortable valley. Now therefore give me this mountain, whereof the Lord spake in that day. For thou heardest in that day how the Anakims were there, and that the cities were great and fenced. He asks for the hardest piece of ground in the whole allocation. The Anakim, the giants whose reputation had frightened an entire nation into 40 years of wandering, were still there, in Hebron, in fortified cities. Every other tribe would have taken that as a reason to ask for somewhere else. He wants it because it is hard. He has been waiting 45 years to finish a job he was prevented from starting, and he is not going to spend his 80s in a valley. And he took it. The text says so plainly. And Caleb drove thence the 3 sons of Anak. Now, I am not going to stand here and tell you that you are as strong now as you were at 40. Caleb was making a claim about himself, not a promise about everybody, and your knees have their own testimony. But look at what he actually asked for. He did not ask to be young. He asked for an assignment. He asked to be given something that mattered at 85, with giants in it. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where he stood, with a great deal of desert behind you, and something you were promised a long time ago that has never been collected. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing, to show that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him." Psalm 92 and 13-15. "And even to your old age I am he, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear, even I will carry, and will deliver you." Isaiah 46:4. "And now, behold, the Lord hath kept me alive, as he said these 45 years, even since the Lord spake this word unto Moses, while the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now, lo, I am this day 85 years old. As yet am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now, for war, both to go out and to come in." Joshua 14:10-11. "That the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, in charity, in patience. The aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things." Titus 2:2-3. Did you hear it? "Those were not my words. They never were. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing." Still, that one word is the argument. The psalm has just described a tree planted in the house of the Lord, and its point is that the fruiting does not stop at the point where the observer expects it to. And it is worth knowing something about the trees he names. "Those planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God." And earlier, "The righteous shall flourish like the palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon." A date palm produces its heaviest yields late. A young palm gives you almost nothing, and the trees that carry the most fruit are the old ones. The psalmist chose that tree deliberately. He is describing an organism whose best productive years arrive after the point at which most things are finished. "Even to your old age I am he, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear. Even I will carry, and will deliver you." Read the verbs in order, because Isaiah has built them into a lifetime. I have made, that is, behind you. I will bear, I will carry, I will deliver. 3 future tenses for a person with gray hair. God is speaking to someone at your stage of life entirely, in terms of what he is still going to do. And notice that in this verse, the carrying is his job and not yours. That matters, because you have spent a lifetime being the one who carries, and the hardest part of this season is not weakness. It is the reassignment. Now, purpose. Practically, yours has changed shape, not ended. It has moved from doing to 2 things that only someone at your stage can do at all. The first is testimony. You have seen things. You have watched prayers answered 30 years after they were prayed, which is a length of time that a person of 40 cannot testify to, because they have not lived it. That is not nostalgia. It is evidence. And there is a young person in your orbit who is currently deciding whether any of this is real, and the only thing that will settle it for them is somebody who was there. The second is Titus's assignment. The aged women likewise, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young. Notice that the teaching is not doctrinal instruction from a platform. Read the list. It is how to run a household, how to be a wife, how to be patient. It is the transmission of practical wisdom by proximity. It happens over a kitchen table, and it does not require you to be able to climb stairs. So ask for your mountain. Not a hobby. A mountain, one thing with consequence in it, something that would not happen if you did not do it. It may be a person rather than a project. It usually is. Somebody in a difficult stretch whom you decide to telephone every week for a year, whether or not it seems to help, whether or not they thank you. That is a fenced city with giants in it. It will cost you more than a hobby would. You are 85 and asking for the hill country. That is not a decline. That is Caleb. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. We come now to the last one, and it is the one that stands behind every other loss in this letter. Death itself. Not fear of dying. We can speak about that another time, and it is a smaller subject than people think. I mean the accumulated fact of the ones who have gone. The names. By your age there is a list, and it is not short, and it has begun to include people who were supposed to be on the other side of it with you, contemporaries, friends you assumed you would grow old alongside, and possibly, and there is no crueler entry in any ledger, a child, and you have learned how to carry it. Nobody watching you would know the weight of the list. You mention them lightly in conversation, because heavy mentions make people uncomfortable, and you have become skilled at the light mention, and that skill cost you something to acquire. What nobody sees is the small daily traffic of it. Reaching for the telephone to tell someone something and remembering mid-motion. Hearing a piece of news and knowing precisely what they would have said about it. The empty side of the bed, which after all this time is not empty in the way it was at first, but is not occupied either. And there is a question underneath, which you have probably never asked in plain words, because it sounds childish, and you are not a childish person. Will I know them? Not will I go to heaven. You have settled that, or as settled as such things get. This is different. Will the person I sat beside for 51 years be recognizably that person? Will the child who died at 19 be the one I knew? Or is what comes next something so entirely other that the particular people I loved are simply concluded? Because if it is that, then heaven is a consolation prize, and not a restoration. And you would never say so out loud, but some part of you has suspected it, and it has taken the comfort out of a great many funerals. That is the question this final movement is for. It is the last thing the Father has to say to you in this letter, and it is the largest. John was an old man on a prison island when he saw it. Patmos is about 10 square miles of rock in the Aegean. He had been sent there, the text says, for the word of God, and for the testimony of Jesus Christ, which is Roman judicial exile, the punishment given to people whose influence made them inconvenient. He was the last one left. Every other man who had walked with Jesus was dead by then, most of them killed, and he was on a rock in the sea, with the memory of a face nobody else alive had seen. And what he is given is not a doctrine, it is a sight. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. New, and the Greek word he uses is not the word for recent or replacement. It is the word for fresh, renewed in kind. This is not the demolition of the old thing and the construction of an unrelated one. It is the same creation, made new, which is precisely what the word restore has meant in every movement of this letter. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. Notice the direction. Every human religion goes upward. The soul ascends, the spirit escapes. We go there. John sees the opposite. He sees God coming down and moving in. The whole architecture of the ending is a descent, not an evacuation. And then, the sentence, and I want you to hear the specificity of it, because it is almost too intimate for the scale of the vision. God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Not there shall be no more sorrow. That comes in the next clause, and it is the general statement. This one is smaller and stranger, and comes first. A hand wiping a face, in a vision full of thrones and seas of glass and a city of gold. The thing John is shown is a gesture you would make to a child, somebody bending down to a particular person and attending to their particular wet face, which means the tears are still there when he arrives. That is what the image requires. You do not wipe a face that is dry. Whatever that day is, it does not begin by pretending nothing happened. It begins with the acknowledgement of every specific grief you carried, and then the removal of it, by hand, one face at a time. And then, from the throne, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. The last thing an old man on a prison rock was told to do was write it down, because it was true. And the reason we have it is that he did, at the end of a long life, when the assignment came to him at an age when most people are told to rest. And maybe, as you listen, you are standing where he stood, the last one left from your own generation, holding a list of names, being shown something you have no way to verify and every reason to want. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. Revelation 21, 3-5. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So, when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. 1 Corinthians 15:52-54. He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from off all faces, and the rebuke of his people shall he take away from off all the earth, for the Lord hath spoken it. Isaiah 25:8. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we, which are alive and remain, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air. And so shall we ever be with the Lord. 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. So will you know them? Look at what Paul says about the mechanism, because he is unusually precise. This corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. Put on. It is the language of clothing, the same body, the same person, having something added over it. Not exchanged, not discarded and replaced with a stranger who shares your name. Clothed. And the word he uses for the change is not annihilation, but transformation. We shall be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. The thing that is changed has to exist beforehand in order to be the thing that gets changed. Continuity is built into the grammar, then shall be brought to pass. The saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Swallowed up. Isaiah's word, quoted by Paul across 7 centuries. He will swallow up death in victory. And it is worth noticing that in Isaiah's day, the surrounding nations told stories about death as the great devourer that swallowed everything. Isaiah takes their image and reverses it. The swallower is swallowed. The thing that ate your list is itself consumed. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we, which are alive and remain, shall be caught up together with them. Together with them. That is the phrase to take away from this letter. Not near them. Not in the same general condition. Together. The word for gathering into one place. And the sentence puts you and them in the same clause, in company, arriving at the same meeting. The particular people are not concluded. The whole architecture of that passage is a reunion, and Paul wrote it, he says explicitly, so that a grieving church would have something to say to each other. Comfort one another with these words. So here is the last practical thing in this letter. Keep saying their names, not only in the light mention that costs you nothing. Say them properly, at least sometimes, to someone who will sit still for it. The whole story, the way they said a particular thing, the joke that only makes sense if you knew them. You are not being morbid, and you are not failing to move on. You are keeping the record of people whom God intends to raise. And the record is not sentimental, it is anticipatory. And when you reach for the telephone and remember mid-motion, let that be what it is. It is not a malfunction. It is your body still holding the shape of a love that outlasted its object, which is exactly the kind of love that the last chapter of the Bible was written about. I make all things new. Not all new things. All things, these things, the particular ones, the ones on your list, made new. That is the 20th promise, and it is the one that holds all the others up. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. One last thing, and then the letter closes. If you would like the next letter to find you, subscribe, and turn on notifications while you are there. The subscribe button, and then the small bell beside it. That is the whole of it. It means that when the next letter is opened, it comes to you rather than waiting for you to remember to look. These letters are not written to a crowd. They are written to one person in one chair, and the notification is simply the way the next one knows where to find you. And before you go, write your first name below, and let it stand as a signature at the bottom of this letter. may you carry this letter with you, folded inside your heart, sealed by His promise. This was a letter from the Father. Every word He spoke was Scripture, and every word was for you. Until the next letter, you are loved, you are seen, and you are His.